Hello my friends and welcome. I have some interesting updates for you today regarding my performance royalty payout from SOCAN. That's the performance rights organization that I deal with here in Canada. I've been getting TV placements more frequently throughout last year and this year, and patiently waiting for this to be reflected on my SOCAN royalty statement, which is sent to me every 3 months, and they reflect the distribution period from nearly a year ago. So my last royalty check from SOCAN is for the fourth quarter of 2022. Things move pretty slowly in the world of performance royalties. Now, a lot of you watching know me as someone who has been working with royalty-free music libraries like Artlist and Motion Array, which typically don't serve the market for television sync music. There are other libraries that do just that. I often refer to them as TV and production music libraries. And I also happen to work with some of these libraries. I don't speak on it that much here on YouTube because those relationships and contracts are something that I have to be a bit more discreet about. But in any case, I've been working super hard to try and find new and interesting opportunities for my music, and the placements are getting more frequent. So I'll chat about those placements a bit today, and I'll be covering more of that progress on this channel in general. But what you might find particularly interesting to know is one key television placement, which translated to a sizable payout on my last SOCAN statement, came from Artlist, which is a royalty-free music library. Now, the fact that music supervisors for television shows are sourcing music from Artlist's catalog is frankly no surprise to me. I personally think that they've done a great job at curating their music selection, but it's interesting because typically we don't associate TV placements with royalty-free libraries, but I think with Artlist specifically, it's something that could happen more frequently as they continue to expand their reach in the industry. At least I hope it's something that'll happen more frequently. So there's two things that I want to do in this video. We're going to take a look at my last SOCAN statement, and we'll chat about a couple of the interesting TV placements that I've had. We'll go through that towards the end of this video, but before I do that, I also want to address some of the confusion surrounding performance royalties, because this is a dense subject that gets a lot of folks confused. And if you're confused, don't worry, you're not alone, and keep watching because I'll explain everything in this video so that you have a much better understanding of this particular income stream that I collect and rely on as a composer. So if you want to skip ahead, go for it. I'll make sure to mark down the chapters for this video, but let's just start by discussing what a performance rights organization is, why it's important to you if you're interested in licensing your music, where the money comes from, and how you get paid. And before I dive in, just a quick reminder to check out productionmusicacademy.com. This is where I host all of my genre-based production courses and track breakdown videos. This is where you can get constructive feedback on your work from both myself and an incredibly talented and supportive community of composers from all over the world. So sign up today and get instant access to my free Intro to Music Licensing course. That link is in the description below. Hit me up in the comments or over email if you have any questions at all. Okay, so let's dig into it. So the first thing to understand here is that performance royalties are just one of several income streams that I collect. Like I mentioned already, I do a lot of work with royalty-free libraries, and I make money from the amount of downloads that my tracks get, as well as upfront buyouts and content ID. These are completely separate income streams from performance royalties. In order to understand what performance royalties are and where they come from, let me first explain to you what a performance rights organization is. A performance rights organization, or PRO, are agencies which act as an intermediary between copyright holders like myself and people who wish to use my copyrighted works publicly. And by publicly, I mean on the radio, on television, on a streaming platform, in a movie theater, on the speakers at your local cafe, at a shopping mall, or even a live event. Most of you in America are familiar with PROs like BMI and ASCAP. If you're in the UK, it's probably PRS. Here in Canada, it's SOCAN. And whatever country you're from, there's most likely a PRO that represents rights holders in your country. So performance royalties are generated in all sorts of interesting ways. Believe it or not, when my band plays festival gigs throughout the summer, I submit all of my set lists and information from each gig to SOCAN and receive royalties for performing my own copyrighted material. Occasionally we do covers too, and just as an example, my band once performed at the CBC building here in Vancouver, and CBC, being the responsible broadcasting network that it is, required that I submit a set list to them. On that set list was a Rolling Stones cover. CBC logs that information with SOCAN so that they know that Stevie B's band performed a cover of The Last Time, and the copyright holders, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, literally receive a royalty from SOCAN because I performed their song. So aside from TV and radio, that's just one of the many performances that PROs track. So where does this magical money come from? How does a single play on radio or television or a performance in a live set end up as a royalty payment in a songwriter's pocket? So performance rights organizations collect fees. Music venues, broadcasters, and music streaming services, they pay fees to PROs. An organization that intends to perform, stream, or broadcast copyrighted music pays annual fees to PROs. The more listeners a venue or broadcaster has, the higher the fee. Once the PROs track performances and broadcasting of music nationwide, they calculate the royalty payments to copyright holders for each song performed and then distribute those fees to their writers and publishers. So in order to receive performance rights income, of course, you must register with a PRO, which is actually quite a straightforward process. And once you're all set up, you would then register your compositions into the PRO's database. If there are multiple writers for your songs, a PRO allows the user to enter credits for multiple writers and to assign percentages to each writer. Okay, so that's all pretty straightforward, but there's still a few unanswered questions here. How does the PRO calculate your earnings exactly? What are cue sheets and why do they matter? Should I register my music with a PRO if I'm working with a music library? How do the music libraries make their money? These are all questions that I hear a lot, so I'll do my best to answer them here. So the truth is, the exact process by which PROs calculate your earnings is not exactly transparent. No one really knows what is going on, except for the people who work at the organizations. There is no way for us to know exactly how much one spin on a radio station or performance at a large festival will generate in performance royalties. But we do know that certain metrics are taken into account. For instance, in the case of a TV placement, the type of placement is taken into consideration, like if the music is placed in a title sequence, or if it's a featured placement where there's no dialogue, or a background placement where there is dialogue. A lot of my placements are background placements, so there's people talking while the track is being played in the background. There's also the length of the track, like how long it's used in the show, and of course how big the audience for that show is. So PROs look at this kind of stuff, and some placements are more lucrative than others. But again, the exact method of calculation isn't public knowledge. It is what it is. So cue sheets are the primary means by which performing rights organizations track the use of music in films and TV. Without cue sheets, it would be, pretty much impossible for composers to be compensated for their work. As composers, we depend on accurate cue sheets to serve as a comprehensive record of the music used in a production. Here on the BMI site, you can see what a cue sheet looks like. Now, unfortunately, the truth is that these aren't always filled out accurately, or they could be missing some information. I don't know for sure, but I do suspect that in some cases, especially when production companies are sourcing royalty-free music, that the songs aren't being listed on the cue sheets at all. And I've got some placements that I've tracked using Tunesat that lend some weight to that theory, but I'll come back to that subject in a minute. So this really depends on the library. If it's an exclusive contract with a production library, they'll likely be registering the music on your behalf. So you might want to hold off until you understand the terms of the contract and what they expect from you. If you're working with a royalty-free music library where the deal is totally non-exclusive and you have complete control over wherever else you decide to upload the music, then yeah, go for it. Register the music with your PRO, unless the library in question prohibits you from registering your music with the PRO, in which case I would probably consider just avoiding them altogether because in my opinion, it's not a great deal. Most royalty-free libraries do allow you to register your own music with a PRO, as they should. I actually did a whole video recently about pitching your music and applying to music libraries, by the way. I'll link that up above if you want to check that out later. Performance royalties are an essential source of revenue for writers, but they are also a primary source of income for publishers. What's important to understand here is that a composition has two sets of rights. The writer's share and the publisher's share. Now, as a songwriter, you own both the writer and the publisher shares by default, but you can transfer rights of the publisher's share to a music library or a publishing company. Now, under a publishing deal, for example, the publisher of the composition is authorized to issue licenses and collect royalties for the music that's subject to the deal. When you sign a contract with a music library or enter into a publishing admin agreement, typically no ownership of the actual master recording is being transferred. You're simply assigning the right to administrate the songs. You're assigning the publisher's share of your song to someone else. Now, contracts differ. In some cases, libraries will want a percentage of your writer's share as well as the publisher's share. And in some other cases, libraries have buyout contracts where they purchase the master recording along with all the rights to any backend royalties in exchange for a single upfront fee. Every composer has to decide for themselves whether these contracts are worth it. I've done many buyout contracts before, and the money upfront is great, but I do have to weigh that against the opportunity to make back-end royalties in the long run. I should also mention that while performance royalties are an essential source of income for both composers and libraries, production libraries will also negotiate blanket license deals and upfront sync fees with the production companies that they work with, and that's also how music libraries make money. Beyond that, some other music libraries also register their catalog with Content ID, and some also distribute the music to streaming platforms. And in the case of royalty-free libraries, of course, they charge monthly or annual subscription fees so you can access the catalog. So there's as many income streams for libraries as there is for composers, but every library is a bit different and each have their own unique contracts with their contributors. It's really important to read those contracts so you completely understand what you're signing up for. Okay, so let's take a quick look at my SOCAN account. Okay, so we're looking at my SOCAN account here, and I'm looking at an older statement all the way back to the 15th of November, 2019. And this is one of the better quarters I've had, made over 2,600 bucks. And if we check out the statement details, you can see on the breakdown below here that most of it came from radio. And this is back in the day when I was pushing my band's music out there as much as I could. We worked with a radio tracker and we managed to get one of our songs, Lies, onto CBC Radio 3, which isn't the most like primo radio spot, but just a little bit of radio play for us was quite lucrative. And occasionally I still collect radio royalties. They're usually from satellite radio though. If you are in a band and you do manage to get your song onto terrestrial radio, the royalties you can collect from that could be really substantial. So taking a look at my most recent statement, my total was $880.64. The breakdown is a little bit different. You can see I'm still collecting a bit of international radio, but the majority of earnings on this statement comes from international audio visual. And if we take a closer look at that, you can see I have two placements here, which are both kind of interesting. So the majority of the money I made on this last statement comes from this track Ice Cream Social, which is from my Artlist catalog. And we can see that the source came from PRS, which is the performance rights organization in the UK. The performance type is TV. I collected 100% of the writers and publishers' share for this placement because Ice Cream Social is actually part of my non-exclusive catalog with Artlist. So I initially registered this track with SOCAN when I first released it, and it's on my Spotify account as well. It's totally non-exclusive. So I got kind of lucky with this one, not only in the sense that somebody, actually filled out the cue sheet for a track that they presumably got from Artlist, but also because I happen to own 100% of the royalty share. Now, what's interesting about this is that the episode and television show wasn't logged for this placement. And that could be because the cue sheet wasn't filled out properly, or maybe for some reason they decided to omit that. I'm not sure why. It would be great to know on what television show this song got placed, but as of now, I just don't know. It's a mystery. Now, if you look above here, you see this song of mine called Always Running, and this is one of my band's old tunes, and we got a placement on a show called Winona Earp on an episode called Blood Red and Going. Now, I've been collecting royalties on this song for years now, and the royalties are substantially lower now than they were when I first got the placement. Just a few bucks total. And this is an episode that gets rerun on various networks, I suppose. And what's interesting about this track is that I got it through working with a music supervisor directly. So this wasn't through a music library. And when I got this placement, I actually got an upfront fee as well. It was $500 for the placement initially, and then I also receive 100% of the royalty share on the back end. And that's because the music supervisor who placed this track, they're hired by the production company to find music for the show. And that's how they make, their money. So I didn't have to give up any publishing or writing for this placement either, which is fantastic. Now, normally, if you're working with like an exclusive production music library, your placement or your song might show up on your PRO backend looking something like this. So here you can see that I have a 50-50 split for the share of the royalties, and the publisher of this track is listed below my name. Now, I mentioned Tunesat earlier, and Tunesat is a company that can detect the usage of your music on broadcasting networks worldwide. And this is really, really interesting. Now, I've uploaded at least half of my non-exclusive catalog from Artlist into Tunesat. And this is a free service, by the way. I can't remember how many tracks they allow you to upload until they start charging you, but I've uploaded at least half or more of my non-exclusive Artlist catalog to Tunesat in order to figure out where my music is, getting used. And you can see here on the top that I've just put Ice Cream Social into their database as well, because I'm curious if I could maybe find where that one placement came from that we were just talking about. It takes a little while for Tunesat to find the placements, but if we go to my detections here, you can see that there's literally hundreds of instances of my music being used from the Artlist catalog on television networks. Now, the vast majority of these detections is advertisements. And this is what you might find interesting. I actually called up a representative from SOCAN and I said, hey, I've been using Tunesat to figure out where, my music is being used. And I've got all of these placements on TV shows, around the world. I've got everything here from like Fox Network to Channel 8 in France and some other UK networks. It's very all over the place. And I asked this representative, am I not owed royalties for this usage? Basically asking him, are people getting away with using my music and not, filing the cue sheets properly? And he told me that SOCAN, I can't speak for other PROs, but he told me that SOCAN doesn't collect royalties for advertisements. So that's just a little interesting tidbit of information. I don't know how BMI and ASCAP and PRS approach this same situation, but I suppose, when it comes to advertisements, I'm not going to make any money on the back end. There's a few of these detections that aren't advertisements though, so I brought those to his attention as well, and he basically said there's not much that they can do unless the cue sheets were filed correctly. So it is entirely possible that people are using music from Artlist or Motion Array or whatever royalty-free music site, and they're just not filing the cue sheet in cases where maybe they ought to be. It's really difficult for me to say. But if you're ever curious about where your music is landing, then try uploading some of your licensing catalog to Tunesat. And like I said, be patient. It takes a little while for the detections to come in, but it's really interesting to see how your music is being used, and you can actually play the clips in which it was used. Otherwise, this year's been great for placements in general. Through working with different music libraries and publishers, I've had placements on CBS, I've had a handful of placements on the show Below Deck, as well as Real Housewives of New York. And I'm not going to know what the results of those placements are on SOCAN in terms of my performance royalties for some time, but I'll definitely keep you guys updated. And I'll let you know in the comments of this video if I finally figure out where that track Ice Cream Social got placed. Hopefully that shows up in my Tunesat at some point. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you got some value from this video, do me a big favor and hit that like button for me. That really helps out the channel, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. If you got any questions at all, please throw them in the comments section and I'll do my best to get back to you. Check out the Production Music Academy. That link is in the description below. Get access to the free Intro to Music Licensing course. Start your licensing journey today. In the meantime, I'm wishing you all happy composing. See you next time. Bye.